Alrighty, good morning. We're going to kind of wrap up our talk about some leaf structure and go into some modifications. Some of them we've already talked about, and some of them we haven't. So with with the leaf structure, we're not necessarily going to look at the actual leaf itself. We're going to look more at the placement of the leaves on the stems today. So to start with, we've got a few terms that we need to make sure that you know. One being the node, and I've drawn the node and the internode on your diagrams there. Um, so the node is the point where the leaf actually attaches to the stem, and then your internode is just the space between two nodes. So that's kind of shown in that diagram right there. So what we're actually going to be looking at is the phyllotaxy of these leaves, which is how they're arranged on the stem. And there are three different ways they can be arranged. They can be opposite, alternate, or whorled. So, if you look at the diagrams, the next set of diagrams, I've drawn those out for you. The first one on the left, there's one leaf per node, so that's the alternating phyllotaxy, and then the one in the middle where you've got two leaves per node, that's going to be called opposite phyllotaxy. And then the third one where you've got three or more leaves per node is called whorled. Now, this is a two-dimensional drawing, so it's kind of hard to visualize, but kind of visualize this as it's jutting out on a three-dimensional space. So it maybe goes to the back and then to the sides, to both sides. So that's kind of where we're going with that. Those are those three different types of terminology there. We've got a few more variations through dicot leaves. We're going to specifically talk about the leaf shape. So dicot leaves can have two basic shapes. The leaf has one part, meaning it's a simple leaf, or it can be a compound leaf, meaning it's got more than one part. So I've drawn you some diagrams there on the bottom part of that front page of the diagrams. The first set, you've got various shapes, but there's only one part. So it might just be a little tiny leaf. It might look like it's got other parts, and I don't even know what shape that middle one is. And then the other one looks more like maybe a maple leaf. So I guess you might say that the middle one is kind of like a palm-ish style. So, but those are all simple leaves. They've got one part, really. The next set are compound leaves to the right, and those are going to have more than one part. As you can tell, you can have either a pinnately compound leaf or a palmately compound leaf. Pinnately ones are going to look kind of like a palm, I guess, in the sense that it's got stuff coming up the top and the bottom, and then it's got one leaf at the terminal end, like a palm tree kind of a leaf, like a long palm, as opposed to that palmately compound, which actually looks like a hand, like a palm of your hand, kind of spread out. So it's got one main petiole and several different extensions off of that main petiole. So those are those two basic shapes. You could also have a twice pinnately compound leaf, which I've drawn below. So then we start getting kind of crazy with the shapes there. So before we get to the monocot leaves, we're going to talk really quick about the different venation patterns that you can have on the leaf. So now we're looking more at the leaf itself rather than how they're oriented. So the last two, we're talking about how the leaves were oriented. So now we're talking about what the leaves are going to look like, specifically with the veins there. So there's two different versions that you can have in a dicot. You can have a pinnate version and a palmate version, and they're going to look really similar to the pinnate and palmate leaf structures. So if you flip over your page, I've drawn you two different pictures. The one on the left is the pinnate version, so you can see that there's one main central vein and then smaller ones coming off the side, just like they were on the pinnate leaf. And then the palmate venation has several different central veins, kind of like there were several different appendages coming out of that one main one on the palmate compound leaf. Normally, with the palmate venation leaves, they're going to have more than three or more of those central veins. So your pinnate venation leaves have only one central vein, but your palmate venation leaves are going to have usually three and sometimes more than that. So okay, so they both are going to form what's called a nettled venation, which is that spiky, so they've got the main vein and then smaller pieces coming out from the side, and from that you get kind of those finer hairs below that. I guess they're not hairs, but they remind me of hairs. So your monocot venation is the next part. So when I see this, I think of grass. If you actually look really closely at kind of the base of the grass, you can definitely see how the monocot leaf wraps around the stem with the sheath. There, I've tried to draw it as it's wrapping around, but it exhibits a venation that's called a parallel venation because it's got the main veins going parallel up the blade. There are some cross veins that are connecting those parallel veins, but you can only see those under a microscope. So usually you can see those parallel venation lines in grass, but you can't see the cross veins. So that kind of takes care of your leaf orientation. We're going to talk really quick about sun and shade leaves because they're a little bit different. So they're based obviously on their location on the plant. So I've drawn you a very bad picture of a tree there, or my version of a tree that's supposed to be a tree on the left there. So obviously the leaves on the top are going to be exposed more to the sun, the canopy part of the tree, and then off to the side even you're going to see more leaves. It's the ones in the middle of the tree that aren't going to see as much sun, and so they are considered to be shade leaves. So sun leaves and shade leaves are actually a little bit different. Shade leaves are usually going to be thinner. They're not going to be as thick. If they've got trichomes, there's going to be fewer than with sun leaves. They don't have as much palisaded spongy mesophyll. They don't need as many chloroplasts because they don't see as much sun. So why would they waste all of their energy making more chloroplasts when they don't need them because they're not going to see as much sunlight? And then their veins and their vascular bundles are going to be spaced further apart as well. So With your sun leaves, it's just basically going to be the same thing, but the opposite. So thicker leaves, usually if there's trichomes, there's going to be more of them than in the shade leaves. They're going to have more spongine palisade mesophyll. They're going to have more chloroplasts, and then those veins and vascular bundles are going to be closer together. So sometimes you'll be given or be asked to draw a paradermal section of a leaf. And so I've drawn you that one to the right of the sun and shade leaf. If you look there, you can see bits of all of the different tissues there. You can see all of the I'm sorry, I lost it. I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh, all of the different tissues. Sorry. So you can see like the palisade mesophyll, the spongy mesophyll, the vascular bundles, things like that. We say this is parallel to the epidermis. This cut is parallel to the epidermis. So, but it's kind of a random thing, but thought I would let you know what a paradermal section, it's usually only used in leaves. So, okay, on to the different leaf modifications. I kind of crammed them all, unfortunately, in there, but yeah. So, we've got an abscission zone. This we'll talk about this later. I'm not sure where, but we'll talk about growth zones, because you can actually see those on branches, and to see how much a branch has grown in a particular season. So sometimes, well, I guess not sometimes, always, when the trees and the plants start going into dormancy, sometimes they will lose their leaves. And so when that happens, we call this leaf abscission, when the leaf detaches itself from the stem of the tree or the plant. So what ends up happening is you get this abscission zone, which I've drawn you there in the bottom left corner of this page. So you get this area of abscission where it's going to depart from the main stem there. And what ends up happening is the plant forms this protective layer, okay? And that's to help prevent any loss of water or other tissues or minerals that the plant wants to make sure it stays in there. So it's almost like forming a scab inside before you actually cut yourself, is kind of what it's doing. So your stem is, your plant or your stem is going to make that protective layer first, and then the abscission layer is where it actually separates from the stem itself. And then what ends up happening is the leaf then at that point is going to detach from the stem, and what's going to be left behind that was made from that protective layer is what's called a leaf scar. So I drew that for you as well up there. So what basically what ends up happening is the enzymes in that middle lamella between the two cells So the ones on the protective layer side, and then the middle lamella between the protective layer side and the abscission layer side, they're going to they're going to make these enzymes that are going to digest through the cell walls there, and that's how it's actually going to detach. So what ends up happening on that protective layer is you've got your protoplasts that are left along that protective layer. They're going to make some of that suberin and insert that into the intercellular spaces, so thereby sealing off that part of the plant. So, okay. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit later about the growth on the branches, because that's actually kind of neat too, because you can see little areas where it's per growing season. So, okay. Now we're going to get into the leaf modifications. That's the last part. Like I said, I kind of threw all those at you in a very tiny spot there. The first one we're going to talk about is a tendril, which we've already talked about before. On your doodle, if you remember, these are like pea plants and ivy and stuff like that. So it forms that long stem modification, and then at the end is what's called a terminal leaflet, a small leaf. So very, very small. So I kind of drew the tendril itself, and then at the very end of that tendril there is the terminal leaflet. So the next one is going to be, what is it, the bulb? Yeah, the bulb. So the bulb itself is going to be a stem modification, but an underground stem modification, but above ground you're going to get this leaf modification popping up. So they're not going to be actual leaves, they're just going to be leaf modifications there. So then you've got spines, which can be some stem modifications. Or no, wait, we talked about thorns. Spines, though, are going to be off of cactuses, or cacti, I guess would be the proper word. So basically they're small leaves, actually, but because they're attached to the cactus itself, which is the stem, but they're not like thorns, because the spine is like an actual leaf. It's just a modified leaf. So reason why you want that is you want to reduce your surface area so you don't have as much water loss. So that's the difference between a thorn and a spine. Spine is a leaf, actually, but the thorn is part of the stem. So do the same purpose for the most part. Going to serve as protection, but just what they actually are is different. And then spines also preserve water loss. So, okay, a bract is the next one. Okay, so that, I didn't draw you anything on that one as I'm looking here. Yeah, you've got nothing there. So the most common version of a bract bract, sorry, are going to be poinsettia leaf. So they surround the flower and they look like they're petals, but they're actually modified leaves. So they look like petals, but they're not actually petals. They're colored leaves. So all right, your next one would be bud scales. So I've kind of drawn you that one. These are, you've got a terminal bud there at the base, and it's just a very small condensed version of a shoot, basically. So where more growth is going to occur. So this is what they leave behind, little areas, and the name is escaping me. After the end of each growing season, there's a little line that's left behind, so you can see how far each branch has grown every year. You just have to look for that little line, and that's determined by the terminal bud. So what ends up happening is you've got these protective leaves that surround that terminal bud. So they're not technically leaves, but then the last one is, I think, kind of interesting. They're the reproductive leaves. The most well-known source, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, is the Kalanchoe plant. They produce this leaf-like structure that's going to make these tiny structures called plantlets. And these plantlets have the ability to grow into a new plant. So it's essentially budding. So where you grow a portion of, or you grow another small version of the species, and then when it falls off, it detaches and falls off, normally lands very near the parent plant, and then can grow into a new plant, same species and everything. So, but yeah, they're at the very ends of those reproductive leaves. So it's kind of an interesting characteristic, I think. So, and I was running out of room, so I don't know how well you can see the little plantlets, but the last one on the right is supposed to be detaching and falling into the soil. So I don't know that I don't think it copied very well, but yeah. So those are your leaf modifications and your leaf structures. So tomorrow we'll do a kind of a review to get you ready for your quiz on Tuesday, and I know you're not going to be here Monday for FFA, so you won't have anything to make up for Monday. So we'll just do the review, you'll do the review, and then turn that in on Tuesday. Take your quiz on Tuesday. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Have a good day.